California wakes before the sun.
A faint glow gathers along the horizon, the first thin blade of light cutting across mountains, valleys, and millions of rooftops stretched from the Oregon border to the Mexican edge.
A quiet hum rises. Traffic. Voices. Airplanes descending into cities built on ambition. Winds sweeping through canyons older than memory.
This is the California most people imagine, a place of opportunity, beauty, and reinvention. But beneath the shimmering promise lies pressure, tension, and a housing crisis that grows more severe with every passing year. In this moment, as dawn lifts across the state, the cracks widen. This is the story of California, a place where millions dream, but where fewer can afford to stay.
California was always a land of extremes. Rich and poor. Ocean and desert. Tech empires and agricultural fields stretching further than the eye can see.
But perhaps the greatest contrast is between those who can afford a home and those who cannot. The camera glides over San Francisco's pastel neighborhoods, where the fog curls like a blanket around the hills. It follows the freeways pouring into Los Angeles, a vast concrete river feeding a city of 4 million, most of whom rent, many of whom struggle. It sweeps over Fresno, Bakersfield, Riverside, and Visalia, places once considered affordable alternatives, now swallowed by the same inflation and shortage gripping the entire state.
California is the most populous state in America.
It is also one of the most expensive places to live on Earth. But the crisis did not come suddenly.
It arrived slowly, then all at once. In the last few years alone, rents surged to unprecedented levels.
San Francisco, San Jose, and Ventura soared past $3,000 for median rent.
Los Angeles single-family rentals climbed around $5,500 a month.
Inland cities once seen as refuges, Bakersfield, Fresno, Visalia, Riverside, saw some of the largest rent spikes in state history.
And then came inflation. A tidal wave.
Nationwide, rents jumped nearly 16% in a single year. Inflation hit a 40-year peak. People saw their paychecks shrink in real time, earning less while everything cost more.
Food. Gas. Medicine. Electricity.
For older adults on fixed incomes, the numbers were devastating.
Many skipped meals to keep their homes.
Some, even after a lifetime of work, edged closer to homelessness. The pressure was rising.
But California wasn't prepared for what came next.
Because in this fragile landscape, already strained by scarcity, already buckling under costs, another disaster struck.
Fire.
In Altadena, in Pacific Palisades, flames roared through canyons and neighborhoods like a living force. More than 11,100 residential structures were destroyed or severely damaged.
Families fled with nothing more than memories and urgency.
And thousands suddenly found themselves competing for the same limited rentals in one of the tightest markets in the country. The crisis deepened overnight. Ria Cousineau and Emily Allen stood stunned in front of what once was home, one burned, the other damaged. The fire took away their shelter, but the housing market made survival even more uncertain. In desperation, they toured 10 houses in 4 days.
One open house filled with 30 families in 10 minutes, an image that echoed the desperation of thousands across the region.
And when they finally found a Pasadena rental, they offered $250 above asking.
Others offered more.
This was not unusual.
It was reality.
In this state of 39 million people, the world's fifth largest economy, scarcity rules. And after disaster, scarcity becomes opportunity for those who control the roof over someone else's head. Bel Air saw a rental jump from $15,900 to $29,500 after the fires, a sudden 86% spike. Desperate families called repeatedly, but the listing vanished. Someone somehow had taken it before the smoke even settled. This is California during crisis, a state already stretched to its breaking point, forced to absorb thousands newly homeless in an environment where empty homes are rare and affordable ones are nearly mythical.
And all the while, the safety nets designed to protect families from homelessness are themselves unraveling.
Federal rental assistance, housing choice vouchers, critical for stability, face deep funding cuts. The House's bill could result in over 400,000 people losing assistance nationwide. Even the Senate's version falls short. California, with its high rents and immense need, stands to feel the impact sharply.
It doesn't end there.
A funding cliff threatens to wipe out another 58,000 emergency housing vouchers, life-saving aid created for people facing homelessness or fleeing gender-based violence.
Cuts to administrative budgets will slow down agencies, reduce support, and leave families searching on their own in markets where every day matters. This isn't just policy. It's survival. Because behind every statistic is someone sitting at their kitchen table, doing the math, and realizing the numbers don't work anymore. A mother in Fresno, behind on rent, praying the next month doesn't bring eviction.
A young worker in San Jose, splitting a one-bedroom with 2 roommates as rent climbs past $3,000. A senior in Riverside forced to choose between medication and housing.
A family displaced from Pacific Palisades, driving neighborhood to neighborhood, searching for anything they can afford.
A couple in Altadena unsure whether their landlord will rebuild or leave them without a home after 15 years.
California is beautiful. California is burning. California is thriving. California is struggling. California is wealthy. California is unaffordable. It is a state defined by contradictions that widen as rents rise, wages stagnate, and assistance evaporates. But beneath all this, beneath the crisis and the fear and the uncertainty, there remains something else: resolve. The same resolve that built a state from dreams, natural disasters, and human resilience. The same determination that pushes communities to support each other in moments of loss and upheaval. California is at a crossroads. This is not just a housing crisis. It is a crisis of identity. A crisis of survival. A crisis that forces us to ask: what happens when the promise of California becomes available only to those who can outbid, outspend, and outweight everyone else? The answer begins here. This is the story of California's skyrocketing rent.
A story written on ash, on invoices, on eviction notices, on decades of decisions and indecisions.
Smoke moves differently in California.
It doesn't rise, it crawls. It creeps across canyons, hugs ridgelines, and drifts into communities with a quiet certainty. By the time most people see it, the fire behind it has already grown. This is the unsettling reality of a state shaped by heat, wind, and fuel that grows thicker with every dry season. In the hills above Altadena and Pacific Palisades, it began like so many California fires do: a whisper of wind, a spark, and then a chain reaction that couldn't be stopped. The first flames flickered against dry brush, and within minutes, they leapt upward, carried by gusts funneled through the canyons, those same canyons that make California beautiful, now turning into wind tunnels of destruction. For residents like Ria Cousineau and Emily Allen, the fire arrived as a shockwave of heat, light, and urgency. Ria watched as the flames consumed the home she had built a life in. Emily saw the sky shift from dusk to orange to black. Emergency alerts buzzed through neighborhoods. Sirens created a chorus of urgency. Helicopters beat the air overhead, dumping water that evaporated before it touched ground. California's fire season, once predictable, has evolved into something longer, sharper, more unforgiving. Homes that once stood secure now sit at the mercy of weather patterns and a warming climate that sends temperatures upward and moisture downward. Hotter days. Drier winters. More fuel on the ground. More lives disrupted. Within hours, the fire-ravaged communities were unrecognizable. Streets where children played were now ash-laden corridors. The smell of smoke mingled with the crackling of trees collapsing under their own weight. Residents who had lived in their homes for decades were suddenly evacuees. The displacement was immediate, and so was the realization that returning home would not mean returning to normal. More than 11,100 residential structures had been destroyed or damaged. Some were burned entirely, nothing left but chimneys like tombstones. Others were so deeply smoke damaged that they became uninhabitable, even if the flames never touched them. Insurance companies began their process, contractors lined up their schedules, but none of that solved the most pressing need of the moment: finding a place to live. In a state already suffering from a severe housing shortage, thousands of newly displaced families entered the rental market overnight. This created a surge unlike anything the region had seen. Rental listings that might sit for a week were suddenly swarmed within hours. Open houses turned into chaotic gatherings of families holding documents, pay stubs, and hope.
Rhea and Emily were among them.
They toured 10 houses in 4 days, an exhausting sprint through a maze of competition.
At one open house, 30 families appeared in the span of 10 minutes.
Cars lined the block.
People stood shoulder to shoulder in hallways. Landlords shook hands, collected applications, and reassured no one. It wasn't just competition, it was desperation.
And desperation drives prices up. In neighborhoods like Bel Air, Brentwood, Sherman Oaks, and Pasadena, rent increases hit record levels. One Bel Air home jumped from $15,900 to $29,500 in the aftermath of the fires, a spike so abrupt that it felt unreal. Some families tried calling the agent repeatedly, only to discover it had already been taken, most likely by someone able to outbid the rest without blinking.
California's rental market was already tight.
The fires made it suffocating.
The most expensive areas became unreachable.
Then the moderately expensive areas became the new frontier of bidding wars. And soon, even the traditionally affordable areas were overwhelmed.
For the displaced, this meant choices that weren't really choices at all.
Rhea and Emily, after offering $250 above asking price for a Pasadena home, were lucky enough to secure it.
Others weren't as fortunate. Some moved into hotels, hoping insurance would cover extended stays. Others bounced between family homes. Some left the region entirely. But here lies the deeper truth: disasters don't create crises, they expose them. California's housing shortage didn't begin with fires.
It began decades earlier, shaped by zoning restrictions, slow construction, high land costs, and resistance to multi-unit housing. Even before the fires, the state needed millions of additional units.
Instead, it got bottlenecks. Projects delayed. Neighborhoods fighting density.
A rental market pushed past its limits.
When disaster strikes, those limits break.
In the charred remains of these communities, residents spoke openly about fear not just of fire, but of losing their place in California entirely.
A fire can take a home. The market can take a lifestyle. And in California, the latter often feels more permanent. Insurance settlements take time. Rebuilding takes years. But rent is due every month.
Families displaced by the fires entered a game where the rules were stacked against them: high rents, fierce competition, limited inventory, and no guarantee that affordable housing would ever return. Meanwhile, landlords, some sympathetic, others opportunistic, found themselves in a position of power. With demand spiking, many raised prices.
Some drastically.
After all, in a capitalist market, scarcity fuels profit. But in a housing system, scarcity also fuels human suffering. In California, the fire line isn't just the boundary between burned and unburned land, it's the boundary between those who can afford to stay and those who can't. Communities like Altadena and Pacific Palisades live near the wildland-urban interface, a beautiful, perilous zone where homes meet wilderness. These areas are increasingly vulnerable to fire, yet they remain highly desirable, pushing prices even higher. It's a paradox unique to California. The landscapes most threatened by natural disaster are also some of the most coveted. The fire exposed another layer of fragility too: the emotional toll of displacement. Rhea described the loss as devastating not just emotionally, but financially. Emily spoke of a fear that followed her everywhere, fear that even after surviving the fire, she wouldn't survive the rental market.
For thousands of families, the story is the same.
Survive the flames, then survive the prices.
What happened in Altadena and Pacific Palisades wasn't an isolated event. It was a preview.
A glimpse into a future where climate disasters and housing scarcity collide, amplifying each other in destructive ways. As the smoke cleared, California faced questions bigger than a single fire.
How do you rebuild communities when the people who live there can't afford to return? How do you preserve neighborhoods when replacement homes cost more than the originals? How do you provide stability in a market where even temporary displacement becomes permanent exile? In the aftermath, the landscape changed forever, not only physically, but economically and emotionally. California's unique beauty has always come with risk.
But in this new era, the cost of that risk is rising faster than ever. Chapter 2 ends with a view from above, scorched earth, winding roads, blackened silhouettes of trees standing like silent witnesses. Beyond the burn scar, the rest of the region stretches outward, green, lively, full of people trying to make sense of a new reality.
California is burning. California is rebuilding. California is becoming harder to hold on to. And this is only the beginning.
Before the fires, before the pandemic, before inflation hit its highest point in 4 decades, California's housing market was already stretched thin. The state did not ease into a shortage, it plunged, gradually and then suddenly, into a crisis of availability, affordability, and access. By the time natural disasters tore through communities, the conditions were already primed for collapse.
California's struggle with housing is not merely the story of expensive coastal cities.
It is the story of a state where demand chronically outpaces supply, where zoning laws, environmental regulations, and high construction costs slow down development, where millions of people compete for far too few homes. A state where owning a home is a dream fewer residents can realistically aspire to, and where renting has become the default lifestyle for a generation.
But scarcity is not neutral. Scarcity creates competition. Competition creates pressure. And pressure inflates prices. In San Francisco, the median rent hovers over $3,000, a figure that doesn't shock anyone anymore because the shock faded years ago. In San Jose, rents stand shoulder to shoulder with San Francisco's, each year pushing the limits of affordability. Ventura and Los Angeles follow, slowed not by lack of desire but by financial reality. Meanwhile, cities like Bakersfield, Fresno, and Visalia, once considered the affordable alternatives, have experienced rent spikes that stun longtime residents.
For many years, Californians believed moving inland was the solution.
Away from the coast, away from luxury markets, away from the bidding wars.
But even those regions have absorbed the ripple effect of scarcity.
As coastal residents were priced out, they moved inland.
As inland prices rose, people moved further out.
Some left the state entirely.
A recent wave of migration has shifted the demographics in cities like Riverside, which became the fastest growing metropolitan area during the pandemic. But growth without housing is like filling a cup that has no bottom. As more families arrived, the available rentals vanished. And the ones that remained became more expensive. The housing shortage did not come from a single event. It came from layers, decades of insufficient construction, restrictive zoning, rising land costs, investor competition, and a demand fueled by economic booms that only benefited part of the population.
California added millions of residents but not enough housing to support them. By the time inflation hit, it was like adding fuel to a fire already burning. Nationwide, rents jumped nearly 16% in just 1 year. California felt the surge intensely.
For older adults on fixed incomes, the math stopped working.
Social Security didn't stretch. Savings eroded faster than anticipated.
Medication costs increased.
Food prices spiked.
And rent, the largest monthly expense, continued to climb with no sign of relief.
Inflation does not ask who can afford it.
Inflation simply comes. And those with the least cushion feel it first and most deeply.
But the crisis is not evenly distributed. Some Californians float above it, insulated by wealth, investments, or inherited property.
Others, millions, carry the burden daily. The divide grows wider with each passing year.
Income inequality in California is among the highest in the country.
Wealth pools in pockets: Silicon Valley, Beverly Hills, San Francisco's luxury districts.
Meanwhile, essential workers, nurses, teachers, grocery clerks, bus drivers struggle to remain near their jobs.
This has created a new phenomenon: long-distance commuters who travel hours each day because they cannot afford to live where they work.
The narrative of the California dream once centered on opportunity, reinvention, and upward mobility.
But for many, the dream now comes with an asterisk: if you can afford it. In Los Angeles County, nearly 2/3 of households rent. Many pay more than half their income toward housing, leaving little room for emergencies, savings, or unexpected crisis. The majority of renters in San Diego, Orange County, and the Bay Area face similar pressures.
The burden is not just financial, it is emotional, psychological, and physical. residents speak of constantly moving to chase lower rent, of living with roommates well into their 30s and 40s,
of downsizing from 2 bedrooms to 1, from 1 bedroom to a studio, from a studio to renting a couch, of juggling multiple jobs not to get ahead, but to keep from falling behind. And then there are those at the precipice, families who face eviction, seniors who run out of money by the 3rd week of the month, and individuals who wait years for affordable housing only to find the waitlist closed due to overwhelming demand. The safety nets designed to catch these families are fraying. Federal rental assistance programs face cuts that could remove or reduce support for tens of thousands in California. More than 58,000 emergency housing vouchers hang in the balance, at risk from funding cliffs that could leave some of the state's most vulnerable residents without options. On the ground, local housing agencies struggle to keep up. Administrative budgets, stretched thin already, face reductions that slow down processing times, delay approvals, and complicate access.
Caseworkers juggle workloads that exceed capacity. Staff burnout rises. Families wait.
All of this feeds into a market where each rental unit becomes a prize, and competition becomes relentless.
The fires showed how quickly a sudden influx of displaced residents can disrupt the balance. But the deeper problem is that the balance was weak to begin with.
California's housing crisis is as much a product of policy as it is of market forces. Skyrocketing rents, limited supply, and widespread displacement do not occur in a vacuum, they are amplified by legislative choices at both the federal and state level. From housing vouchers to emergency relief, the policies and funding decisions made by lawmakers directly determine who can stay in their homes and who is left vulnerable.
Understanding the legislative battleground is critical to grasping the full scope of California's housing instability.
At the federal level, housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8, represent the largest and most effective tool for addressing homelessness and housing instability in the United States. Vouchers help bridge the gap between low incomes and high rental costs, allowing families, seniors, and people with disabilities to access stable housing. In California, where rents often exceed national averages by thousands of dollars per month, these vouchers are not a luxury, they are a lifeline.
Yet, funding for these programs remains chronically insufficient.
The proposed 2026 federal appropriations bills highlight the challenge. The House bill, which maintains flat funding, would effectively reduce assistance by leaving more than 400,000 people nationwide without vouchers, while the Senate bill, though slightly more generous, still leaves gaps that would affect hundreds of thousands. For California, the consequences are stark. Agencies tasked with distributing vouchers may have to cut the number of families served, delay placement, or shift costs to tenants by raising rent burdens, actions that deepen inequality and insecurity. Emergency housing vouchers, established in 2021 to assist those at risk of homelessness or fleeing domestic violence, face a looming funding cliff. About 58,000 households nationally risk losing support if Congress does not act. California, with its high rents, low vacancy rates, and frequent disasters, would bear a disproportionate share of this shortfall. Families who had been stabilized through this program could suddenly find themselves back on the brink, competing for scarce rental units in a market that heavily favors wealthier tenants. Administrative funding for local housing agencies is also under threat. These agencies play a crucial role in helping families navigate housing searches, providing security deposits, and coordinating with landlords. Cuts to administrative budgets hinder their capacity to operate efficiently, slowing the delivery of assistance and forcing agencies to triage needs. In practice, this means that even eligible households may wait months or years for vouchers, while rents continue to climb, exacerbating instability. State-level legislation can help mitigate these pressures, but California's approach is fragmented. Measures like the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 impose annual rent increase limits on many properties, yet enforcement is inconsistent and numerous units fall outside its scope, including many single-family homes. After disasters, price gouging laws allow only modest increases, but these protections are limited by enforcement capacity and exceptions. The result is a patchwork system in which some renters are shielded while many remain exposed to market volatility and exploitation. Funding uncertainty also undermines long-term solutions. Housing assistance is most effective when agencies can plan for the future, secure permanent housing stock, and maintain consistent services. When Congress or state legislatures delay or reduce funding, agencies are forced to make short-term decisions, leaving families in limbo. Without guaranteed support, the gains made by emergency programs, housing vouchers, and disaster assistance risk being temporary, failing to create stable, lasting solutions.
The legislative challenge is compounded by political dynamics.
Partisan disagreements over budget priorities, spending caps, and federal oversight create a climate where housing assistance can become a bargaining chip rather than a guaranteed service. Bipartisan agreements, when reached, are sometimes undermined by rescission packages or unilateral decisions to withhold funds. For Californians, the result is uncertainty. Families cannot predict whether the next funding cycle will support their housing or leave them at risk.
California's housing crisis is thus both structural and political.
The state's high costs, coupled with federal underfunding and legislative gaps, create a pressure cooker where low-income renters, seniors, and disaster-displaced families face daily insecurity. Every delayed decision, every flat budget, every loophole in tenant protections translates into real-world hardship, evictions, overcrowding, homelessness, and the erosion of community networks.
Yet policy also offers hope.
Expanding funding for vouchers, securing emergency assistance, and strengthening tenant protections can have immediate, tangible effects. Programs like the Emergency Housing Voucher Program demonstrated this potential, successfully housing tens of thousands of families at risk of homelessness when adequately supported. Robust funding allows agencies to provide search assistance, security deposits, and other tools that stabilize households, improve educational outcomes for children, and reduce reliance on emergency services.
California's challenge is to integrate these lessons into a long-term strategy.
Short-term measures like disaster relief or temporary rental assistance are necessary, but insufficient. Without a combination of federal support, state-level protections, and proactive housing development, the cycles of displacement, rent spikes, and instability will continue unabated.
Lawmakers must recognize that housing is not merely an economic commodity, it is a fundamental human need, essential to health, education, employment, and community stability. In this legislative battleground, the stakes are human lives. Every policy decision, whether to fund vouchers, enforce rent protections, or allocate emergency assistance, determines whether Californians can remain in their communities or are forced into instability. The housing crisis is not an inevitable market outcome, it is shaped by choices. And in California, where the intersection of affordability, disasters, and inequality is most acute, those choices will define the state's future for generations. California's housing crisis is more than a struggle for renters, it is a statewide economic and social emergency affecting every sector of society. As rents surge and housing becomes increasingly scarce, the impacts ripple far beyond individual households. The crisis reshapes the workforce, disrupts education, strains the healthcare system, and undermines long-term economic growth. Workers forced to move farther from job centers endure longer, more expensive commutes, heightening stress and reducing productivity. Businesses lose employees who can no longer afford to live nearby, and many small businesses face shrinking customer bases as residents migrate to cheaper regions or leave the state entirely. The economic engine of California slows when workers spend more time commuting than contributing and when families spend the majority of their income on rent rather than supporting local economies. Schools also feel the strain. Frequent displacement forces children to move between districts, affecting academic performance and stability. Enrollment declines in high-cost districts lead to reduced funding, fewer programs, and larger class sizes, disproportionately harming low-income and minority students. Healthcare costs escalate as housing instability increases stress, anxiety, chronic illness, and emergency room visits. Families delaying medical treatment to pay rent experience worse long-term outcomes, placing additional burden on hospitals and public health systems. Overcrowded living situations, often the only remaining affordable option, lead to health issues, strained relationships, and reduced overall quality of life. Communities lose social cohesion as neighbors relocate, and the cultural fabric of long-established neighborhoods frays. Ultimately, California pays a steep price economically, socially, and morally when housing becomes unattainable. The crisis affects not just renters, but entire communities, industries, and generations. Without bold, coordinated action, these costs will continue to rise, threatening the stability and prosperity of the state. California's housing crisis is massive, but scattered across the state are real, proven strategies offering hope, practical solutions that show what can work when innovation, policy, and community effort align.
Chapter 11 explores these solutions not as abstract theories but as models already reshaping neighborhoods, reducing displacement, and expanding access to stable, affordable homes.
One of the most impactful strategies is the rapid growth of accessory dwelling units, ADUs.
Once limited by restrictive zoning laws, ADUs have become a flexible tool for expanding supply without the long timelines of large-scale developments. Homeowners can add backyard cottages, garage conversions, or small second units, creating new rental options while increasing neighborhood density organically. ADUs help seniors age in place, give families extra income, and introduce affordability into single-family districts historically resistant to change.
Modular housing is another effective solution, cutting construction time and costs dramatically.
Built off-site and assembled on prepared foundations, modular units reduce delays caused by weather, labor shortages, and permitting bottlenecks. Cities like Los Angeles and Oakland have used modular construction to quickly create supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, showing that speed, quality, and cost efficiency can coexist.
Co-living models, shared homes with private rooms and communal kitchens, offer affordability for young workers, students, and low-income residents.
These communities reduce per-person rent and foster social support networks, easing the isolation that often accompanies economic stress. While not a complete solution, co-living provides flexible, lower-cost options in high-demand urban areas. Micro-units, small but efficient apartments, maximize limited land by offering compact living spaces designed for affordability. These units, often located near transit hubs, appeal to single adults, service workers, and young professionals priced out of larger apartments.
When paired with thoughtful design and shared amenities, micro-units can create vibrant, community-oriented buildings.
Another major avenue of innovation is transit-oriented development, TOD. Building dense housing near rail lines, bus corridors, and job centers reduces dependence on cars, lowers transportation costs, and connects residents to opportunities. TODs blend housing, retail, and public transit, creating walkable neighborhoods that reduce emissions and increase affordability through reduced daily expenses. Equally important are community land trusts, CLTs, which remove land from the speculative market to ensure permanent affordability. CLTs purchase land and lease homes to residents at stabilized, reduced prices. This model protects communities from gentrification and displacement, particularly in historically marginalized neighborhoods where residents face rising rents and increased developer interest.
CLTs empower residents, give them decision-making influence, and provide intergenerational stability.
Inclusionary zoning policies require or incentivize developers to include affordable units in new projects. When enforced effectively, these policies ensure that as neighborhoods grow wealthier, affordability remains embedded in the fabric of new developments. Paired with density bonuses and fee reductions, inclusionary zoning can shape long-term affordability without relying solely on subsidies.
Public-private partnerships also play a crucial role.
By combining government support with private sector innovation, California has seen successful affordable housing developments that blend funding sources, streamline construction, and increase long-term sustainability. These partnerships help bridge financing gaps, reduce bureaucratic hurdles, and produce high-quality housing at lower cost.
But housing isn't just about buildings, it's about the people who live in them. That's why holistic support services are essential.
Programs that integrate housing with mental health care, job training, substance use treatment, and childcare create stability far beyond rent payments. These wraparound services break cycles of homelessness and poverty more effectively than housing alone. The chapter also highlights the importance of data-driven planning. Cities increasingly use predictive analytics to identify neighborhoods at high risk of displacement, allowing earlier intervention with rental assistance, eviction prevention, and targeted development. Finally, disaster resilience must be integrated into all new housing. Fire-resistant materials, smart land use, and rapid response temporary housing reduce the destabilizing effects of fires, floods, and earthquakes, crises that have repeatedly intensified California's housing shortages. Together, these strategies demonstrate that solutions exist, they are working, and they can scale if backed by political will, funding, and community support. Chapter 11 shows that California's housing crisis is not unsolvable. It requires commitment, innovation, and the courage to implement proven approaches statewide.
California's housing crisis cannot be solved by creativity and local initiatives alone. Its scale requires strong, consistent, and forward-thinking policy, especially at the federal level. Chapter 12 explores how effective governance, reliable funding, and coordinated public systems form the backbone of housing stability. Without them, even the most innovative programs remain limited, fragmented, or short-lived. At the core of the federal role are programs like the Housing Choice Voucher, HCV, program and emergency housing vouchers, EHVs. These programs bridge the gap between what low-income households can afford and the rents demanded in high-cost markets like California. For hundreds of thousands of families, seniors, people with disabilities, children, and veterans, vouchers literally mean the difference between stability and homelessness. Yet funding has never met the level of need. Millions who qualify for assistance never receive it, while those who do face uncertainty when annual funding becomes a political bargaining chip. The chapter highlights how inconsistent federal allocations create cycles of instability. Proposed cuts, rescissions, and budget caps threaten to remove vouchers or freeze renewal funding. Administrative budgets for local housing authorities often fall short, making it harder to issue vouchers, inspect units, or support families searching for housing. When inflation rises faster than federal funding formulas, rents outpace voucher values, narrowing the pool of available units and increasing rent burdens. Policy innovation is essential. One effective strategy is small area fair market rents, SAFMRs, which adjust voucher values based on neighborhood rental rates rather than broad regional averages. This allows families access to high-opportunity neighborhoods with better schools and lower poverty. Another important reform is reducing bureaucratic hurdles that discourage landlords from participating in voucher programs, such as inspection delays, confusing paperwork, or slow payment systems. Incentivizing landlord participation, offering signing bonuses, and guaranteeing damage mitigation can dramatically expand housing options. The chapter emphasizes that federal investment in affordable housing construction is vital. Tax credits, HUD grants, and the National Housing Trust Fund play significant roles in funding new developments, especially for extremely low-income households. However, chronic underfunding has limited the scale of construction, leaving California short hundreds of thousands of units. Streamlining federal compliance requirements and increasing capital support could accelerate affordable housing creation across the state. State-level policy must align with federal initiatives. California has passed numerous pro-housing laws, streamlining permitting, encouraging ADUs, strengthening tenant protections, and investing in homelessness programs. But without federal support, state resources alone are insufficient. Collaboration is key. Federal resources can scale local innovation, while California's policy reforms can ensure those resources are used efficiently and equitably. This also highlights the importance of tenant protections and rights as part of policy innovation. Eviction protections, rent stabilization, and anti-discrimination enforcement help keep families in their homes. When paired with vouchers and affordable units, these protections ensure long-term stability rather than short-term relief. Expanding legal aid for tenants, monitoring landlord practices, and enforcing fair housing laws are crucial components of a comprehensive housing system. A forward-thinking policy approach must include data and research. Using real-time data to understand rental trends, identify neighborhoods at risk of displacement, and evaluate program effectiveness leads to smarter decision-making. Federal agencies can fund research, collect national housing data, and provide guidance that helps states like California respond more effectively to emerging challenges. Finally, disaster resilience is a major policy priority. Wildfires, earthquakes, and floods repeatedly worsen California's housing shortage. Federal disaster relief, insurance reform, and rapid housing deployment programs play critical roles in preventing long-term displacement. Policies that integrate disaster preparedness with affordable housing strategies can reduce recovery times and protect vulnerable populations. While California has shown leadership in housing policy, the federal government remains the most influential force. Consistent funding, strong tenant protections, disaster readiness, and innovative voucher reforms must work together to create a stable, equitable, and future-ready housing system. Without a robust federal role, California's progress will always fall short of its needs. Behind every chart, statistic, and policy debate in California's housing crisis is a human story, often fragile, often painful, and always deeply real.
Chapter 13 reveals the lived experience behind the headlines, showing how skyrocketing rents and housing instability reshape the emotional landscape of families, neighborhoods, and entire communities.
For many Californians, housing insecurity begins quietly. A rent increase arrives. A job's hours are cut.
Grocery bills rise.
Medical expenses pile up. Suddenly, families find themselves one paycheck away from eviction.
These households are not abstract data points, they are seniors choosing between medication and rent, single mothers working multiple jobs, and young adults forced into perpetual roommate arrangements just to exist. The emotional weight of uncertainty becomes a constant presence, shaping choices and limiting opportunities. Children bear some of the deepest impacts.
When families are forced to move repeatedly due to rent hikes or evictions, children switch schools, lose support networks, and fall behind academically.
Teachers across California report students arriving exhausted from long commutes from distant cheaper cities, or from overcrowded living conditions. The instability leaves emotional imprints, anxiety, withdrawal, or behavioral challenges that reflect the turmoil at home.
Seniors experience a different kind of vulnerability.
Many rely on fixed incomes that cannot keep pace with California's rapidly rising rents. After decades in their communities, they face displacement to distant counties or out-of-state regions where they have no ties. Some move into RVs, others into cars, and many turn to food banks to stretch limited Social Security checks. The psychological toll of losing one's home late in life is profound: fear, grief, and a feeling of invisibility. For people with disabilities, high rents often mean living in substandard units or facing homelessness when accessibility needs cannot be met. The struggle is not merely financial, it is emotional and physical. Being forced into environments that compromise safety or health adds layers of stress that most housing policy discussions fail to capture.
Workers across every industry also carry the burden.
Teachers, nurses, retail workers, restaurant staff, even firefighters find themselves priced out of the communities they serve. The emotional contradiction is striking: Californians who sustain their cities cannot afford to live in them. Long commutes lead to burnout, family strain, and an erosion of community cohesion.
Many feel as though California is slowly pushing them out.
Wildfires and disasters intensify the human toll. Thousands who lost homes in the Palisades and Eaton fires enter a rental market already at a breaking point. They search desperately for temporary housing, crowd open houses, and bid against other displaced families.
The trauma of losing a home is immediately followed by the stress of competing for scarce rentals, an emotional double blow.
Communities themselves suffer when residents are forced out.
Neighborhoods lose their cultural fabric.
Longtime friendships fade as people scatter. Local businesses lose workers and customers. The intangible threads that hold communities together, trust, familiarity, shared history, begin to unravel. This makes one truth clear: California's housing crisis is not only about units, statistics, or economic trends. It is about the daily emotional experiences of millions of residents trying to hold on to dignity, security, and belonging. The human toll is the heart of the story, and the reason solutions cannot wait.
California's housing crisis is immense, but not immovable.
This focuses on the pathways forward, the realistic, evidence-based strategies the state can pursue to stabilize rents, expand affordability, protect tenants, and rebuild communities with resilience and equity. While no single policy can solve the crisis, a coordinated set of actions can shift California toward a future where housing is attainable rather than aspirational. The first major path forward is expanding supply, especially affordable and mixed-income housing. California's housing shortage, estimated in the millions, continues to push rents upward year after year.
Streamlining construction, modernizing zoning laws, and incentivizing multifamily development remain essential.
Accessory dwelling units, ADUs, have shown promise, proving that even small infill solutions can collectively make significant impact. But long-term success requires persistent investment in large-scale affordable housing construction, prioritizing urban cores, transit corridors, and areas of job growth.
The second strategy is strengthening protections for renters. California has taken steps through rent caps and just cause eviction laws, but enforcement remains uneven.
Expanding legal aid, improving tenant education, and ensuring local agencies have resources to respond to violations can prevent displacement before it happens.
Anti-price gouging rules after disasters like the Palisades and Eaton fires must be rigorously enforced, with penalties strong enough to deter exploitation.
Tenants facing rent hikes or eviction need clear, accessible pathways to support. The third path is investing in long-term stability programs such as rental assistance, emergency housing vouchers, and homelessness prevention services. These programs keep families housed at critical moments and reduce the enormous social and economic costs of displacement. California can push for a more reliable federal partnership, but it can also create complementary state-funded voucher programs to reduce dependence on unpredictable federal budgets. Stable funding streams ensure that students, seniors, workers, and vulnerable families don't fall through gaps in policy cycles. Fourth, addressing economic inequality in wages is essential.
Even with modest rent growth, stagnant wages leave many workers unable to afford basic housing.
Aligning minimum wage policies with regional cost of living realities, offering tax credits for low-income households, and expanding workforce housing near employment centers can alleviate pressure.
When families spend less on long commutes and more on community participation, neighborhoods become stronger and more resilient. Fifth, disaster resilience must become a housing priority rather than an afterthought.
Rebuilding after fires like those in Altadena and Pacific Palisades requires faster coordination, more fire-resistant construction, and clear strategies to prevent disaster-driven rent spikes. California can lead the nation in connecting wildfire resilience with long-term affordability, ensuring that recovery does not become a catalyst for displacement or disaster gentrification. Lastly, public-private collaboration represents one of the most powerful tools available. Nonprofits, developers, philanthropies, cities, and state agencies can pool resources, data, and technology to accelerate solutions. Public land can be repurposed for affordable housing, while tech-driven platforms can match landlords with voucher holders more efficiently. Successful models already exist, California simply needs to scale them. California stands at a critical juncture. The state that symbolizes innovation, opportunity, and the promise of a better life for millions now faces a housing crisis that threatens its very foundation. Skyrocketing rents, displacement, and homelessness are no longer abstract statistics, they are lived realities for families, seniors, and workers across the state. From the bustling streets of San Francisco to the sun-drenched neighborhoods of Los Angeles, the tension between housing supply and demand has reached a tipping point. Every policy decision, every funding cut, and every delay in construction reverberates across communities, shaping who thrives, who survives, and who is left behind. As we have explored in previous chapters, the roots of this crisis are complex. Decades of underfunding, inequitable zoning laws, natural disasters, and market speculation have combined to create a perfect storm. Fires displace families, pushing them into neighborhoods already grappling with high demand. Inflation and stagnant wages prevent households from keeping up with rents. Discrimination and systemic inequities make it harder for vulnerable populations to secure housing. The human stories: families forced to move, seniors sacrificing meals to pay rent, children uprooted from schools, illustrate the urgency of action. Yet the crisis is not without hope. Across California, innovative solutions, emerging strategies, and community-driven initiatives are demonstrating that change is possible. Modular housing, accessory dwelling units, co-living arrangements, and transit-oriented development show how creativity and flexibility can increase supply quickly. Community land trusts, inclusionary zoning, and public-private partnerships reveal that equity and long-term affordability are achievable when intentional policies are applied. When combined with robust federal and state funding, these strategies offer a blueprint for stabilizing housing markets and protecting vulnerable populations. The challenge, however, lies not only in finding solutions but in executing them at scale. California is a vast, diverse state, and solutions that work in one city may fail in another. Local governments, developers, and communities must navigate a maze of regulations, funding cycles, and competing interests. Federal and state funding programs must be consistent, predictable, and adequately resourced to support long-term stability. Without sustained investment and coordination, innovative strategies risk becoming isolated experiments rather than statewide transformations. As we look to the future, California faces a pivotal choice: continue down the path of reactive measures, temporary assistance, and fragmented policy, or embrace comprehensive, coordinated approaches that prioritize equity, resilience, and sustainability.
The stakes are enormous.
Housing is more than shelter, it is the foundation of economic stability, health, education, and community. When families have stable housing, children thrive in schools, adults remain employed, and communities flourish. When housing fails, the consequences ripple outward: evictions rise, social services strain, and neighborhoods fracture. The coming years will test California's ability to balance growth, affordability, and equity. Decisions about funding, zoning, construction, and disaster preparedness will determine whether the state can provide homes for all residents or whether millions will be left behind. The policies enacted today, the investments made in housing infrastructure, and the protections afforded to renters and homeowners will shape the next generation of Californians. And yet, despite the uncertainty, one fact is clear: the story of California housing is far from over. Every fire that displaces a family, every apartment listing that rises beyond reach, every voucher denied or delayed is part of a larger narrative, a narrative of struggle, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of home. The state teeters on the edge of transformation, and what comes next will define not only California but the model it sets for housing crises across the nation. In this moment of tension, as communities wait for action and families struggle to keep a roof over their heads, one question hangs in the air: will California rise to the challenge, or will the dream of affordable housing slip further out of reach? The answer lies in the decisions of lawmakers, planners, developers, and citizens alike. It lies in whether innovation, equity, and courage can overcome entrenched systems of inequality and scarcity. California's housing crisis is not just a policy debate, it is a story unfolding in real time, a human drama that affects millions of lives, and a test of the state's capacity for justice and resilience. As the sun sets over the Pacific coastline, the fate of families, neighborhoods, and generations of Californians remains uncertain. And for those watching, one thing is clear: the next chapter has yet to be written.